This is one of those videos that may be just self-obvious to hopefully the majority of the people who listen to it. I'm hoping that this isn't a big revelation to anyone, but there are some that may, this may be helpful to kind of see the world this way. A lot of the misunderstandings and confusions we have in comics when we talk about this stuff is that we're not talking in the same language. And what I mean by that is terms have different meanings depending on who's going with them. It'd be wonderful if terms are absolute, but they're not. And so part of getting things connected and moving to solutions is to get on the same page with what those terms mean. Hey everybody, this is Perch. The, you know, I did a video a couple days ago that you might have seen talking about observations from the bookstore. And the observations that basically manga was growing very, very rapidly, that YA was growing very, very rapidly in the kids section, and that the comics, the Western graphic novels, kind of OGNs, was shrinking. And you get some people kind of looking into that, and then a day later, Newsarama, who's owned by somebody else now, I forget who. Anyway, they published an article saying, "Hey, the comic industry numbers are up." And then they added in the secondary line, which, again, hopefully most of the people listening to this channel on a regular basis know this, and in manga and YA are leading that charge. That's where the money is coming from. And it's weird that the comic industry and news sites don't use Scholastic more regularly, because that is, if we're talking where's that YA money coming from, there's this desire in the comic industry for whatever reason to want to kind of generalize Scholastic, and they tend to not name just Scholastic as much as they should. And I don't know if it's because they don't want to kind of talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room or what, but the reference things like, hey, heavily led by Dogman and books like that. It's like, yeah, guess who owns Dogman? And it's Scholastic. Scholastic is making big pushes into this business. But it was nice that they published that article, because I had a bunch of people who were coming into my comments talking about how, no, manga isn't real, and no, those books are not that popular, and it's all myth, and so on. I always love it when people, it's like, look, you cannot like this stuff, but sales figures are sales figures. I don't know what to tell you, but the other side to that argument is this kind of continued debate or frustration or anger or videos about, is the comic industry healthy or not. And I know a couple of the bigger video channel guys get irritated with me because I draw the distinction between what do you mean when you say the comic industry is doing great. But this is all about talking the same language. The comic book industry is doing great if you're talking about comics as a whole. And when you're talking about comics or graphic novels as kind of a big umbrella thing, then you are pulling in manga, and you are pulling in YA, and you are pulling in Scholastic, and you're pulling in a lot of that stuff. But to many people, when you say comic industry, you think Marvel, DC, Image, and some others. That's what a lot of people view when you say comic industry. That's what they view, and you're welcome to that definition if you want. But then you also have to acknowledge that, for others, in fact, for how businesses define the comic industry, it's bigger than that. And so I guess, if you want to say that the comic industry is imploding, you can say that. It's not factually true unless you are saying, okay, by comic industry, I mean Marvel and DC, and by imploding, I mean declining for floppies. I mean, you just have to start really specifying what you're talking about. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's better when we're specific about what it is that we're saying. I think that's what leads to positive results. I think that in general, any kind of extreme comments are nuts. I think people who say the comic industry is doing amazing, it's never been better, I think the people who say things like that are being extremely disingenuous by, what it is that they're talking about. Because when they say that stuff, they don't follow it up with the next sentence that is, yeah, Scholastic has really figured out new ways to make money in this market. Or manga is having a resurgence in the West, and you're seeing more and more books published there. You don't see people say that. They usually use that as an argument against somebody saying the counter. Somebody saying, oh, the comic industry is a mess. And then the argument will be, no, the comic industry is doing better than better than ever. And the reality is, neither person is talking the same language. They're talking about different things, and whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's a wasted conversation. It's never going to get anywhere. It'd be like if you went to China and you were talking in English, and then the people do not understand you, and you're like, well, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change my language. You adapt to me. That's not going to work. Obviously, the way you're successful in life is usually by trying to figure out kind of what the other person's trying to communicate, and then finding the way to engage in that conversation. Just kind of sitting there and being obstinate about it gets you nowhere. But in general, I've done a lot of these videos on the comic industry, and I wish the emotion could be taken out of it, because I think to have a healthy, productive conversation, you do have to take the emotion out of it. There are certain areas of the comic industry that are doing the big comic industry that are doing quite well, that are succeeding, that are showing a lot of trends that suggest that life is good. And then there's other part of the comic industry that are showing a lot of fragility, a lot of danger, that it's not sustainable. And so all I can do, I guess, in these videos when I talk is I'll try and define the terms the way I mean them and where I'm coming from, and then you could do with that what you want. I think unlike a lot of other channels, unlike a lot of other videos, I'm not trying to tell you how to think. I'm not trying to tell you what you should like or dislike or what to believe or not believe. I'm just trying to throw out, here's ways to look at a problem. You should look at the problem in whatever way works for you. There are more than one way to solve this. I think if you're going to talk about the health of the comic industry, there's profits, there's futures, there's forecasts, there's overall distribution and market and sustainability of that. There's kind of the costs that go into it, and are they rising, are they flat? There's international distribution and how that factors into everything. I mean, there's a lot of pieces to it, and I think it's to me, it's a dumb conversation. If you're going to come in, you're going to make a blanket statement, and then you're going to cherry pick different data points to prove your side of the story. And I recognize that right now I'm pissing off kind of both extremes. And I do wish from time to time, this is my own silly, it doesn't matter kind of wish. I wish that there would be this realization at times by the people who are really far down one end or the other, really, really far down the comic industry is dying, it's about to explode, and the comic industry is better than it's ever been. There's no problems at all. Kind of those two extremes regularly show up in my comments. And I wish those two sides would realize you're really similar. I know you don't want to hear that, but the arguments, the way you're going after this is the same. And I don't think in either end it's very productive. I think in both sides it's just kind of people shouting past each other. It doesn't matter. It doesn't do anything. It's not making any progress. Um, I, you know, at the end of the day, I think if you are Marvel and DC, you should be a little concerned about your current standing. I think you should be thinking about a bunch of things that aren't working for you or aren't growing like they should be. International distribution is a big one. Digital is a big one. And kind of your presence on store shelves outside of a local comic shop is a big one. It's interesting to hear how people assign blame. I mean, the local comic shop model is broken. You hear people say, but in the reality, the local comic shop, it's a place of business. And it's not for me or anyone to kind of come in and want to tell people how their business is doing. At the end of the day, it's pretty binary. Either the local comic shop has figured out a way to make money, either from the market they're in or whatever else, or they're not. And if they're not going to survive. There are comic shops that are doing well, and they have figured out the right product to sell to the right audience, to the right market, to whatever it happens to be. They're doing fine. If you walked into that shop and said, "Hey, local comic shop business is broken and it's an outdated gross model," you'd be laughed out of that store. And of course you would. You'd be telling somebody who is making money, who does know how their business runs, you're telling them, just nonsensical bullshit. You're telling them things that don't matter. If you went into a store that was failing and wanted to tell them about how the local comic shop model is failing, you'd probably be thrown out, but for a different reason. It'd be like, you're just a jerk showing up to insult somebody. Neither one of those things is very helpful. On the other hand, if you're Marvel or you're DC and you're saying comics have never been better, and you've got a bunch of comic shops that are struggling, as several are, then likewise you have no credibility. That's where you see comic shops that I think that this may be a weird way to look at it, but for the comic shop is concerned, there's a number of comic shops that are on very friendly terms with the publishers and the creators. There's a handful. Of Big Bang Comics, for example, is always very chummy with a lot of these people, and so are places like Newsarama and some of those guys. And of course, they're making money off this industry. They're happy with their lot in life. They're doing well, or at least what they think is well. So of course they're going to be chummy with them, and of course they're going to push back against anyone who says there's a problem. On the other end, yeah, there's a lot of comic shops out there that are not doing particularly well who are pretty pissed at Marvel and DC on a regular basis. You don't have to have one of those viewpoints. You can believe whatever you want, but at least, you should try and understand why people think the way they think. That this is why. It comes down to who's making money and who's not, which I guess I'll end where I began. That's not a revelation for anyone, right? I mean, isn't everything I'm saying super, super common sense? I think it is, but who knows anymore? Common sense is not as common as it used to be, or maybe ever was. Anyway, what do you think of all this? Do you see all these arguments where it's like you guys both have points, but you're talking a different language, and so you're talking past each other, and you're getting nowhere. And at what point do you just pull the plug and say, you know what, not for me. This argument is not for me. This comic is not for me, and this argument is also not for me. Anyway, let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. It is what it is. Every now and then I got to talk about this stuff. I'm not sure why. It's venting, I suppose. Sorry about that. Anyway, thanks for listening.